Hello and welcome to another imperfectly perfect, perfectly imperfect conversation for the Flourishing Education podcast. Today, I bring you my new guest, Dr. Penny Rabiger. A very warm welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much. And thanks for inviting me. It's an honor.
Yeah, thank you, Penny. So, for the listeners, I saw Penny's profile on LinkedIn and I was just blown away and just thought, oh, wow, I really want to talk to you. So I reached out, as I often do. And Penny kindly said, yes, let's have a conversation. So here she is. So I'm really, yeah, I'm very grateful you said yes to us having a conversation, and I'm very delighted. So I wonder if we could start with the question I ask all of my guests when we get started, which is, where are you in the world? Who are you? And what has been your journey thus far? Um, Anything you want to share?
Yeah, so where am I in the world? So geographically, I am currently sitting in my little home office as a freelancer in Tottenham in London. Uh, and uh, I am I'm a 55-year-old woman who is racialized as white and Jewish. I'm an educator. Um, and yeah, I've been on quite a journey to where I am now. I mainly deal with working with people who are interested in discovering, exploring, developing their racial literacy, and I come at it not as somebody who is there and everything is tickety boo and now I'm good and everyone else needs fixing. Quite the opposite. I think I'm coming at it from a process of appreciative inquiry, um, knowing that this work is permanent, knowing that it intersects with everything, but believing that um, you know racism is the underpinning operating model for modern capitalist life. And, whiteness is the frame that kind of operates through, whiteness being skin color, but not only, or not alone, right? And sometimes not at all. So whiteness is this kind of perceived norm of somebody who is generally white, male, cisgender, heterosexual, non-disabled, a citizen, um, middle class, often middle-aged, and so I'm interested in the kind of divergence from that framing and why the world is set up to serve this tiny minority of people that fit that framing. Um, I grew up in Northwest London in a single parent household. Um, my parents split up, divorced when before I was born. I'm the youngest of three, um, and that was quite formative. I grew up in the 70s and 80s in kind of multicultural schools. Um, my mum was a teacher, um, and I went to university having done pretty badly at school, being sort of suspended and in the corridors in detentions and God knows what for the entirety of my school life. But I went to university because it was free and because you got a grant and it was an opportunity to get out of my house. I actually left home the year before that and lived independently uh, because of circumstance at home. Home was pretty grim. Um, and following that experience at university where I studied social anthropology, not really knowing what it was, but it sounded the most interesting thing that one could do for 3 years. I loved it. So then I kind of thought maybe I'm an anthropologist. So I bought a ticket with my friend to go to a rainbow gathering. So we were in the era of New Age and raving and um, all those things. And I really loved communal living, doing stuff together for a purpose. So I went with my friend to a rainbow gathering. This time we said, okay, we'll go somewhere warm instead of being in rainy tents across Europe or in Irish muddy fields and whatnot. And this one was in Israel, in the Arava desert. I knew nothing about Israel. I am Jewish, but I had no kind of formal Jewish upbringing. My grandparents were card-carrying communists. My mum was very anti-religion. Um, but we grew up in one of the most Jewish places in London, so it was in my orbit, and definitely, yeah, a lot of my friends were Jewish. Um, so off we went, and I bought a year's open ticket, backpacked around. Myself and my friend parted ways probably about 3 weeks into our time because she wanted to go north and I wanted to go south. And one thing led to another, and I basically came back to the UK 12 years later, having done my teacher's training there. So I discovered that if you're Jewish, you can do a year, you can have a year of university for free, and you get a little bit of tax breaks and stuff to support you to make Aliyah, it's called, which is basically become a dual Israeli citizen with my British citizenship. And that's when I started to learn about Israel. I started to learn about colonialism, settler colonialism, about the Palestinian people, to the extent that you can learn about it because it's very much sort of hidden and you're indoctrinated into a very specific history. And I started to teach in primary and secondary schools. So I taught in only in kind of experimental schools, they were called. So my teacher's training was in um, democratic and alternative education. So it was this weird juxtaposition of this kind of apartheid state on the backdrop of the Oslo Accords, the peace accords being signed, and there being massive hope, and then the murder of Rabin by Jewish uh, fundamentalists, Israeli Jewish fundamentalists. Yeah, so I thought maybe I could influence from within. I thought working in these democratic and alternative schools might help. Uh, the primary school I taught at was the first and only school that integrated religious and non-religious Jewish children in the same classrooms because there's a lot of friction between the secular and the religious communities in Israel, which you don't hear much about. And the secondary school where I was for 7 years was a school for the performing arts. And they're both state schools, state funded, and both of them attracted a huge proportion of children with special educational needs, mainly because other schools weren't really interested in sort of supporting them. So I taught in huge classrooms, sometimes up to 38 children, no teaching assistants, just me and the young people. 40 to 50% of children in my class were, had special educational needs from being on the autistic spectrum, what was then, called Asperger's, ADHD, the whole thing. So we had to work out ways of working. And while I was there, I did my master's through distance learning through Leeds University because they had a department above a Toyota showroom in the industrial center of Jerusalem. And I was
Oh,
like, I'd like to do it. I'd like to be able to come back to the UK. I don't
mm,
know what will happen. And I did my master's thesis through action research looking at learning styles, which now gets totally poo-pooed. But what I learned was that if you're in dialogue with students and with yourself around what your communication styles are, the way that you operate, the way that your students like to be taught or find it easier to engage, something magical happens. Now I know that's called metacognition. Now I know that that's called relational learning. But it was beautiful, and those students are now in their late 30s. We're still in touch. We reminisce about what an amazing time that was, just generally for us as teacher and learners. And so I had a kind of quite an amazing time of relational community experience. Um, I met my partner through my MA because he same age as me, but he was teaching one of the courses. We got friendly, and after the course was over and I got my master's, we started dating. He was a social worker, mental health social worker, and a professional dancer and choreographer. So that was fun. And we came back to the UK in 2007, not because I wanted to particularly, but because he wanted to do a postdoc here. Um, but that kind of experience really opened my eyes to some of the things that I had grown up with. I started to be able to recognize racism much more clearly. Obviously, both my parents would have seen themselves as, schooling us towards anti-racism in that kind of white liberal way where it's a bit slippery and slidey, not consistent or reliable. Um, and yeah, so coming back to the UK, I couldn't get a job as a teacher, despite the fact that I'd taught for 10, 11 years, with this really rich experience of managing classrooms with really varied populations of children, and also managing through. So within the Israeli population, there's a large population of Jewish children who are not racialized as white. So they are people from um, Moroccan, Yemenite, Iraqi, Iranian, Indian, and a range of other either Arab countries or North African or African countries who their people have been Jews since Judaism was a thing. But the country is structured, and most people's understanding of what a Jew is structured around a concept of Jews being white, European, and that the Holocaust was the central feature of Jewish identity. So the racist formations are quite the same there. The outcomes for those children and the expectations of those children and the explicit instruction to me as a teacher, oh, those ones will mess around. Those ones, we don't have much hope for their potential. These ones are the elite ones. These ones go into the streaming and setting. The same as happens in the UK, right? The same as, we're told to keep an eye on this one from kindergarten. We know that black children are touched, moved around, brought to the front of the class, surveilled, right from preschool, right through their schooling experiences. So I started to recognize that there, and then coming to the UK, not being able to get a job as a teacher because they said your qualification isn't valid here and your experience isn't counted as experience. And I was like, oh, I think there's a lot of black brain surgeons driving buses in London because of the same attitudes, right? So
Craziness is
craziness, yeah. But of course, I'm white, and I'm now middle class and educated and whatever. So I found my way, doors flung open, and I started working for education organizations and went on this incredible trajectory of becoming director of business development at the leading well, it was a pilot when I started there, but it became the leading information and guidance service for schools, the key for school leaders, and yeah, I had a great experience. But all the time I was noticing the racial formations, noticing how I was complicit in those, how recruitment processes, performance management processes in these corporates, in these charities, in these startups that I work for, were structured, and started to kind of find my way into being able to disrupt those. And that gradually led to me reducing my sort of formally being employed by people and upping my freelance work, setting up also with a bunch of random people that I met on Twitter. We set up the BAME Ed network, which was a national charity for um, for white educators and educators of color to collaborate together to try to interrupt structural racism and try to support Black and Brown majority colleagues through, into teaching and through into leadership, and try to speak about those issues. Um, yeah, and then through that work, I will come to the end of this in a second. Through
It's
that work,
beautiful. I'm loving listening. So
yeah,
loving your
through
journey.
that work, it put me in front of people. It gave me opportunities to collaborate with people, and I was asked if I would be a coach on the Leeds Beckett University Centre for Race Education and Decolonialities anti-racist school award, and I took up that role, and I've been doing that for years now. I'm lead coach on that program. There's 12 of us who are coaches, and it's been a real journey of kind of exploration, working with schools to try to help them to become anti-racist, but also sort of trying to reliably navigate the performative aspect that schools want to get an award, and they want to have a kind of like affirmation that they are not racist.
Yes.
So
A
it's
tiny little shiny bit of paper that you can put on the wall and
yeah,
look how amazing we are, right?
yeah, yeah, and of course that work became turbocharged following the murder of George Floyd, and this kind of global awakening, maybe, or reawakening, or I don't know what it was, but a lot of the 94% of school leaders who are racialized as white, thinking, wow, we should really do something. So, um, and from that led to me being able to do a PhD, because having had these coaching conversations with schools, I spoke to, an hour each school once a year. You speak to them, and in between, we deliver all sorts of training and support and resources and stuff. So after the first few schools, maybe 20, 30 hours of speaking to people, I contacted Professor Vinnie Lander, who wrote the award and ran the Centre for Race Education and Decoloniality, and said, you know what, there's some really interesting repetitive themes coming through here. And from my readings of like basic stuff around critical race theory and about race and racism, you know, somebody should do some research. This is a golden opportunity. And she very kindly said to me, well, yeah, we can write stuff together, but it's of no benefit to you because you're not an academic. So perhaps you need to do a PhD. And, I was like, well, I can't do a PhD. um, first of all, I can't afford it. Second of all, I've kind of scraped through all education. I've enjoyed it, but I wouldn't call myself an academic. Anyway, she very kindly said, that's fine. If you do it on the Anti-Racist School Award, then there's no fees attached. You just have to support your living costs. And I was working freelance anyway, so I left my day job that I was at 4 days a week and went fully freelance and did a PhD and looked at the experiences of people leading anti-racism efforts in their schools. And it's been such a gift to spend, 3.5, 4 years reading, thinking, collaborating, listening, working with educators, attending every single event, conference, online session, training, things that I can attend, reading all the books and articles I could get my hands on, listening to all the podcasts, and just really immersing myself in what's happening. So I finished that, had my Viva last January, and yeah, I've been trying to produce, articles, blog posts, little videolets and stuff to kind of communicate what I think I understand. And that's what I do.
Mm, thank you, and congrats on the PhD, because
Oh, yeah,
no
thanks.
mean feat. Being halfway through mine.
Right. Yeah, it's a ride. I mean, I also coach people who are doing their PhDs, not because I know how to do it, not because I am, any more advanced, but because having a lot of people are kind of a bit abandoned by their supervisors, or to be fair, actually, supervisors don't get any financial gain or any extra time for doing it. So often they have to make some difficult choices, and people doing their PhDs don't feel as supported. So I really enjoy coaching people and just being the ears, the shoulder, and I can chuck a few resources their way and read alongside with them and support in those ways. So it's lovely to be able to stay connected with people doing this journey, and hopefully, like a birth doula. I'm also a qualified birth doula, I didn't say.
Oh,
But
wow.
like a birth doula, it's like helping people, you absolutely unconditionally believe in their capacity to do this.
Yeah.
And it'll hurt and it'll be long, and you'll feel things that you never thought you'd ever feel physically, emotionally, mentally. Uh, but just being there saying, you've got this, you can do this, try breathing this way, try thinking that way, try, yeah,
Amazing. I love this.
yeah.
Oh, this is
So,
so cool. Um, I mean, what a beautiful journey, Penny. Thank you for sharing. Um, so, as a linguist, I'd love us to linger on that word, anti-racism or
mm,
anti-racist. Um, and I would love to hear what you have to say about those words, and their importance. And you were sort of talking about how, to me, it feels so important more than ever in 2026. Particularly, I'm really worried about what the trends I'm seeing um, in terms of politics in
mhm,
particular.
mhm,
I'm originally from France,
mhm,
um, and I've always, well, in France, we've always watched like the far right coming, go ebbing and flowing, and
mm,
yeah, a lot of me feels very anxious around what's going on, and I really, when I talk to people, a lot of people seem to. I often say, if we're not careful, um, we might find ourselves with another Brexit on our hands.
mhm,
Um, because people, like when Brexit was going on, people were going, no, people will never vote to get out of Europe. And then when it happened, people were like, oh. And
mhm,
I hear people go, nobody will get reform in.
mm.
And I'm like, if we don't educate people, if we don't have important conversations, then we might have a really, really horrible, nasty surprise. Um,
Yeah, I don't know if it'll be a surprise. I think for now I'm kind of stepped into this world. Um, it's hard to be surprised by things. I wouldn't I wouldn't be surprised if we get a reform government. Um, it all seems to be heading that way. I think in terms of your question around like the words, it is something that really interests me in this notion of anti-racism when working with schools, particularly, but actually any organization, is people rush to the notion of anti-racism without engaging with the concepts that kind of underpin it. So I think it's really, really important to understand what race is, isn't, and what it does. Um, and and so that's part of the reason why I do the racial literacy work, is to just walk people through calmly and step by step, what is race actually? It's news to a lot of people that it's not biological, that there is no biological basis, and that actually this thinking that racism is biology is an ideology. It's not it, you know, um, it's nothing except an ideology. It was created for a specific reason, um, to organize people into, human, not quite human, and non-human. I'm also interested in people's understanding that racism is somehow located in the past, that it was then and it's not now, that racism comes into schools or into organizations sort of trailed in by bad white racists, um, and it comes into a kind of non-racist, you know, environment, and that what we need to do is kind of seal the school
Mm.
against racism coming in from outside. So it's also about teaching people how we're all complicit, we're all reproducing racism, we're all taught to think in ways that are racist, no matter how we are racialized as well. I think that's the other thing that interests me about working with schools, is often people who are racialized as Black, global majority, or people who are racialized as Muslim or Jewish even, think that therefore they are not uh, complicit,
Mm.
that they don't hold racist ideas, or if they do, um, it's because of specific things, right?
Mm.
Um, so I'm interested in kind of helping people with that before we rush to anti-racism, because you can't be anti something if you don't understand
What the
what
the
it
yeah.
is. And also a lot of, in my doctoral research, almost everybody talked about it as a journey. But when we do the coaching calls, we often ask people, when they say it's a journey, we say, okay, so the destination is to be anti-racist. That's it. There's no racism. So where have you come from? If you're on a journey, what's your starting point? Surely racist. And people are like, oh, no, 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 I was never racist. And it's like, well, why are we unlearning this stuff? So part of it is also to model. I often joke and say I'd love to wear a t-shirt that says this is what a racist looks like, but I know I'd probably be punched. But what I mean is, um, because people can do it with t-shirts going, this is what a feminist looks like, and you see some bloke walking around, and you're like, oh, it's so cool. But what I mean is, I'm, deep in this exploration and learning and commitment. It's not just an intellectual thing. I'm committed to it, but I'm also complicit in reproducing racism, um, in many, many ways. Some of that is personally doing things that are racist, and you know being corrected or correcting myself or whatever. But also some of the things that we have to do in life, include sort of skirting around, um, dealing with it later, accepting. And that can be things from like ordering on Amazon to not speaking up at work, you know. It can be as a teacher, um, um, applying. some of the school rules, which if you unpack them, they are structurally racist, and they conceptualize of children as, of black and brown children as potentially volatile, underachieving, having little potential for success, coming from bad families, um, you know.
Mm.
So I think it is really, really important to start there with unpacking anti-racism and saying, well, we've got to be really secure in our knowledge of racism. And the other thing I really try to do is to help people see what I think is really fundamental to understanding how to be anti-racist, is to understand that racism is permanent. And people don't like that idea. We think that one day we'll get to a place where there's no racism. Racism is permanent. It is the sort of operating model of modern life, as I said earlier. So what we should be trying to do is embarking on permanent anti-racism, right? That is in resistance to permanent racism. So we should be learning to see racism in situ, learning to see racialized dynamics. So, here we are, two women who are racialized as white, having a conversation. you know we need to be mindful of, there will be specific power dynamics, there will be specific places of privilege where we can speak about certain things that somebody who is racialized as black
Mm.
and a woman will pay a humongous price compared to what ripples we might cause in our conversation, right? So I think it's about learning to see those racialized dynamics, learning to see how racism is present everywhere all the time. One of the chapters in my thesis was Everything Everywhere All at Once, based on that amazing film. um, but to me that really helps, because then we can stop kidding ourselves that we
Yeah.
are there. Then we
Mm.
can stop feeling shame and upset when we
Mm.
just do what we're programmed to
Yeah.
do. And we can learn. So when somebody says, Penny, when you were talking in that way, I really don't like that language, or I really think that you missed something crucial, or, it's really patronizing. And white women have a long history of patronizing, of
Pardon
caroning.
me, white feminists
Yeah. Well, like one of my friends says to me,
and liberals.
yeah, yeah,
There's a real. I would love you us to have a conversation around like that. What you
yeah,
said about your parents being liberal, because I think
yeah,
there's something there very
oh, yeah, yeah,
right.
yeah. One of my friends says to me, oh, yet again, you just whited on me, and I'm like, what did I do? And they go, ugh, do I really have to point it out? And I'm like, was it this? And they're like, oh yeah, it was that as well, but it was also this. So it's, you need reliable allies. We talk about allies as if I'm a white ally to black people. I need reliable white and black, you know, people racialized in every way that it's possible to be racialized. And I describe myself as racialized as white because white is a race, just as any other race. We need to form alliances, we need to link arms, and we need to be critically engaging with what we see, what we hear, what we do, the structures, the institutional norms, the neighborhoods that we live in, the schools that we send our children to or don't send our children to, the ways that we not only stand up for our children, but also think about all children as our children. The way that we school our children to understand their racialized identities, and to kind of interact with the world accordingly. I just feel like when we talk about anti-racism, that's what I think we're talking about, is about coming to terms with, and not going down this route well, I wrote one article that was about completion culture. So moving against completion culture. So, kind of neoliberal cultures are all about the toolkit and the checkbox and which language should I use. And
And
yeah, and that's the other thing with the Anti-Racist School Award is, uh, and I'm sure anyone who's listening to this who's actually completed it will agree that it's really tough. It's really difficult to get through it because the coaches are unequivocal about what we mean. And so it's not about just doing a bunch of things and then saying, well, did all these things. We demand that you understand what's the research underpinning that? What's the evidence and the testimonies from real people that say this is an issue? What is your understanding of that? Um, why did you choose to make that intervention or change that thing? And then what was the impact of it? And then we really drive people insane because we go, but what's the evidence of that impact? So people go, teachers are much more confident to deal with racist incidents. And we go, okay, how do you know? And it often boils down to a teacher told me in a corridor, uh, and it's like, okay, that's good, but how are you going to make sure not only that teachers are confident, but what would happen if you said our there's the professional standards that are set out by the Department for Education, but our professional standards say you are not safe to work with children unless you really understand race, racism, and anti-racism, and you really like are integrating that into your teaching and of course the curriculum. Um, so what would you do? How would you make it? How would you use the tools of bureaucracy and of completion culture to actually hold people in a place where you are not seen as a professional or safe person unless you can demonstrate that this is your modus operandi, this is how you operate in our school. So these kind of completer finisher mentalities of like, oh yeah, I've done the award. Oh yeah, I've done some training. We just keep asking, and what was the impact of that? And where can you show me evidence of that impact? Um, so yeah, that's kind of how we're trying to look at it.
it's so powerful to me. Like it sounds like I really love what you're saying because you've used a word that I use a lot, which is like the unlearning. So the last 5 years in particular, I feel like the unlearning is relentless.
It is.
Is relentless where I
Yeah,
just keep thinking, wow, here it is again. Wow, look at this again. Um, and I'm completely with you with the loving people actually. So there's a in the School of Education where I am at Bristol Uni, there are two amazing female scholars, Rose and Alex, who literally are doing like such fantastic research, but also really amazing work to invite, like, call us all in. And I just love being in their presence because it's about that sort of like creating an environment where the dialogue is possible.
that's right. That to my mind, that is it's really important. I think this idea of dialogue again with the schools on the anti-racist school award, they say, oh yeah, yeah, we have courageous conversations, but then we ask them to what end? Like, great, it's courageous for you. It's often it's white people talking to other white people or harvesting kind of trauma porn from black and global majority people to kind of feed their need to know that when we talk about structural and institutional racism, and we've said surely it's not here, and then somebody in my institution tells me, oh yeah, it is, it happened to me, then they can sort of go, oh, now I start to believe you. Um, So I think that the dialogue needs to be it needs to be really we need to learn how to have kind of critical dialogue. We need to draw on the vast, decades of testimony, research, information, and not necessarily try and harvest that at source from people who are racially minoritized and experiencing that. There's a brilliant article called Predatory White Anti-Racism by a American psychologist called Paulie Badenhorst. And I really like it because it sort of they explain how there's a kind of psychological, psychosocial mechanism in white people that we can then practice saying, I'm so sorry that happened to you. And we can really feel we can practice, putting our shame aside, but it's at a huge cost. We're kind of harvesting this stuff from people in order to feel things that make us feel affirmed that we are anti-racists, and we've stepped over the threshold of understanding that we're complicit and that we might be culpable and not dying from the shame. And I think that is an important, these are important stages to go through that journey of kind of just learning to go, that's awful. I'm sorry I did that. That's racist. Right? Rather than go, oh, it wasn't my intention and I didn't mean to and I'm going to cry now. But if we have to do that by being supported and fed by people's pain, then that's just a colonialist enslavement power structure that we're just reenacting, and that ain't good for anyone, sort of thing. So yeah, I think conversations are important. Holding each other to account is important. Doing that work, and also taking breaks as well, and allowing people to kind of take some time to breathe and then come back in is also important. Yeah, however, that's a whole other conversation, but however that's done.
Yeah, and also I wonder, Penny, like as I'm hearing you say this, you sort of talking about people talking about journey. To me, it's also about where people are currently at, right?
Mm,
In terms of, and so understanding that also.
mhm,
Um, so and knowing that you don't stay where you are either. Like I know that after our conversation, I will be a different person because of the encounter that we've had.
mm,
So there's that how the also the neurological, the like the whole that those imperfectly perfect conversations are for me what like keeps like moving me both like physically, emotionally, all of
mm,
those things. But there's something in what you said around, oh, but I didn't mean it and I'm gonna cry now. And I've been reading a lot of work around like white fragility in particular. Um, and how also that is in an environment where if you're talking about anti-racism, right, like how we might then bring it back to it's about me and what I need as a white person, right, in a conversation that is also not appropriate. But I've been having conversations with people around that, and a lot of a couple of people got quite angry with me when I talked about white fragility.
mm.
So I wonder whether you could share some. If
Yeah, I think some of my realizations are definitely a move away from white fragility because it's become one of those things, right, where it becomes a buzzword. One of the things that really helps me is to understand white supremacy culture, right? And there's some beautiful work by a Canadian woman called Tema Okun who sets out the characteristics of white supremacy culture, and they're really recognizable. They're things like worship of the written word. There's one right way, perfectionism, urgency. all of these things which I think they come up when we're talking about white fragility. And I think if I interface that with some of the um, thinking that I've been doing, over I don't know how long while I was in Israel and since I left, and definitely um, that's been accelerated since October the 7th, 2023, um, is what happens when we are taught, when we're socialized into an ideological position, which includes our racialized identity and a socialization that we need to protect white supremacy. So when we talk about white supremacy, I'm not talking about Ku Klux Klan. I'm not talking about extreme acts. I'm talking about accepting and assuming an order of the world where white interests and needs are prioritized and where whiteness is prioritized. So that includes prioritizing heterosexuality, prioritizing maleness, prioritizing able-bodiedness, and all of those things. So if you imagine there's this little cookie cutter norm, we're taught that that is the standard and the universal human, although it's a very tiny segment of society. When I think about it in terms of my ex-colleagues in Israel, ex-friends in Israel, um, people that are still there, and some of my um, friends who are here, who are Jewish, and people who are not Jewish. But it seems like everybody is Zionist, right? Everybody upholds the right to a white supremacist version of what it is to be Israeli, or what Israel is and what it's for. And I think some of the kind of mass move towards Zionism also by anti-Semites. This is getting complicated, but I can unpack it all another time. But it is this protection of is a protection of white supremacy. Jews, as I said before, they are not white and European, but they have been conceptualized. They've become white in the kind of psyches of
Mm,
most
mm, mm.
people and societies. So anti-Semitism is like the worst kind of racism because it's against white people, is
Yeah,
how it's perceived, right?
yes.
But what I think is interesting about it is what happens to people when that is threatened. And when your ideological foundations are kind of ruptured, and um, that an unlearning is often you have a moment that kind of, or a series of moments that kind of rupture your ideological position. You're like, wait, I don't think everything is how was told it was, and it's not fitting. Now, either you recoil back and you go, well, yes, it is, and this is why, and you start finding the reasons why, and you double down on that, or you start to shift and start going through this process of unlearning. And it's embodied, right? It's so
Mm.
embodied.
Yes, yes.
Um, so just briefly, something that happened to me recently is I saw a film that my dad made. My dad was a documentary filmmaker for BBC and for others during the 60s and early 70s, and was quite successful until there was a kind of, his story is there was a kind of communist witch hunt, and because of my mum's family, he could no longer get work and basically had to take up a job in America and be a teacher of documentary film. Anyway, long and the short of it is, I watched a film of his with Idris Shah talking about people's kind of biased attitudes and sort of non-tolerant attitudes to others, shot in 1970. And in it, there was a white South African woman who told the story of how she has been campaigning against apartheid for many years, that she understood that ideologically she had been schooled and socialized to something that was completely wrong, and that she understood that Black people are human and they do have equal human rights, and we should not be structuring the world so that it is white, white supremacists. And she said, it's come at big personal and professional cost. She'd been arrested, she'd lost jobs, she'd been beaten, all sorts of things had happened to her. She said, I saw myself as somebody who was no longer, I was anti-apartheid. But she said, it was only when I came to a country that wasn't structured in apartheid that I realized that I'd never actually spent any time with Black people. So I went into a shoe shop. I was served by a Black man in the shoe shop. And she said, my body just freaked out. My mind was saying, Black people are human. I know this, apartheid is wrong and dehumanizing. She said, but my heart rate went up. I started to feel shaky and sweaty and anxious and, fearful. And she said, it's the unlearning is not just an intellectual pursuit. It's not just compassion based. It's not just logic. It's not just rejecting ideology. It's also disentangling it from the chemical reactions that have been programmed into our bodies of how to respond, which is why, as an anti-racist white woman, I can do all sorts of things. My body can kind of betray my logic and my long unlearning process, and people can pick up stuff from me that is still entangled in my embodied response to the world. So yeah, that also really interests me, and thinking about Zionism and what it means to be a Jew and what it means to be somebody who, I still have Israeli citizenship. My passport expired years ago. I haven't been there for many, many years. And although my partner's family are there, but yeah, what that all means, and what that means now, particularly where this sort of ramping up of the genocide against Palestinian people, it's really important for me to include that.
Thank you. And I'm hearing you speak, Penny, and I read some of your work already, and then I'm thinking, my goodness, yes, the reason I wanted to talk to you is because for me, that education piece, so around, all those words that we keep using, like, a lot of people talk about Zionism and, anti-Semitism and genocide or not genocide, all of those conversations. I think there is a real lack of education, a real lack of knowledge. And even if there is some knowledge, there's also, for me, there's always been, I call myself a pra-academic, courtesy of my friend Bern Nichols, so in Australia, who taught me that word first. So I'm grateful to her. But it's like literally, I'm a recovering teacher. I was in the classroom. And so, yes, research is really useful, but if it's not going to change how I show up in the classroom, then I'm not interested. Like, you can write all the most beautiful articles behind paywalls. If it's not changing how I show up and how I interact with my peers, then I'm not interested. And a lot of, so the University of Bristol has pledged 10 million for reparative futures. Obviously, Bristol being, used to be a slavery port. A lot of the university has been built on chattel and slavery. All of those things are really vital and essential. We need to talk about them. And now I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, you bring such calm peace in the conversation
Mm,
that we're having here, that to me is almost like essential to have those conversations,
mm,
because often when I try and have conversations, or when I have conversations with some people, I can really see how it almost like makes you, the body's response forces you
absolutely.
into like shutting down. I can't deal with this.
Absolutely.
I don't want to.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I have such embodied responses to so much of this work. And I mean, from my childhood experiences, I have PTSD anyway. And I've sort of been exploring how, oh, it sounds really trite and naff to say, it's my superpower and stuff, but I think there are elements of being somebody who understands the embodied experience of trauma and what it does to your body and brain. And, I can feel the chemical shifts of the fight or flight, of the kind of threat. And I've been interested in it, like with my relationship to authority. And so I'm kind of interested in how that can serve me for this work. And also it makes it something I have to be really watchful about. And certainly, when I find myself in all white spaces, for example, I get a kind of fizzing under my skin and a sort of alert to, there's going to be a lot of casual racism here. There's going to be a lot of kind of really um, sort of people just being really unaware of
Mm.
how the world works. So I do have to do quite a lot of breathing and being calm, and sometimes just getting up and going. There have been places where I just kind of get up and leave because
I
I
can't.
don't want to be part of it.
Yes.
And there's nothing I can do.
Mm.
And I often, with my partner, he's often saying to me, you should stick around and explain to people. And I'm like, nah. I'm
Sometimes you have
not.
to choose, right? Like,
Yeah, and I'm not a like savior running around trying to convert people. Most people just, they're not interested. It's not their thing, and uh, it I'd rather invest in people who are sort of partway there, and that I can grow from their interest in things as well. Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to say on the kind of how I might present as calm. I don't see myself as very calm, but um, my PhD supervisor, Vinnie Lander, Professor Vinnie Lander, would always say, you've got to put the theory to work. And she kind of was talking about in my writing, but also in life. And I think theory, um, there's something very calming about theory. And you
mm.
talked about kind of knowledge, and I always sort of snicker at this idea of knowledge rich curriculums because they're so thin on knowledge, these apparently knowledge rich curriculums in
Well,
schools.
that we need another hour to discuss.
Yeah, yeah. Um, but I think when you read stuff and you can understand it and apply it, and as you say, as a pracademic, you can then apply it. So just now, I've been just messing around with trying to create a graphic novel uh, that explains whiteness as property, because I think it's a really important concept, but it can stay in the field of being sort of theory. And I was asked as part of a course that I did with the amazing Professor Alana Lentin, who very generously allows people to just join some of her teaching at the University of Western Sydney. So joining online, getting up at 4:30 in the morning every Thursday for weeks was a killer. But she said, look, each of you is going to have to take a concept and explain it to the rest of us. And it was a really good exercise because now I've internalized that and I can explain it, but I can also see how it works. works, and I can see how it works in my life, in, those in my orbit. I can see it in situations, and therefore theory is your best friend because there's something solid.
Mm, mm,
So when you're engaged in situations that are conflict or disagreement or clashes of ideological positions, you can stand on the shoulders of those giants who taught you those things, and they're kind of, I feel like they're with me, the people, Derek Bell and Bell Hooks and Sarah Ahmed and Bonilla Silva and all these theorists who've taught me all these amazing things. um and I also feel really excited when I see those theories used by others and extended. It feels like one of my family members is in somebody's picture, photograph on their Facebook page or something. Do you know what I mean? It's like, uh,
mm,
and then it might be next to another theorist I've never heard of, and then I engage with that, and you
mm.
sort of bring them in. So I think that can create strength. It can create, it can also help remind you and keep you humble to say, look, I am but a small cog in a massive machine, and that feels good to know that there's lots of people out there thinking and doing and acting and being activists and being scholar activists and doing simple acts of just walking alongside people or providing food for something, or you know what I mean. So yeah, I think that can create a kind of strength and something to hold on to through choppy seas.
I love that. It's like I call that like what Ramdas said, like walking each other home. In that
Yeah,
sense, like they're just helping each other, and I like that in this, particularly in this, really stormy weather. Um,
yeah, it is. It's very stormy.
I mean, I could talk to you for hours.
Likewise.
Literally, it's like, oh wow, there's so many more questions I want to ask you. So maybe I can invite you again and again and again. What I feel really called like to do a lot with my work is what you were saying. So I agree with you. I always say we are all walking on like the shoulders of giants and sort of like building on their amazing ideas, and I love connecting the dots because I think that's how, like through education, when
Mm.
Nelson Mandela said education is the most powerful tool you can use to change the world, and of course it has been weaponized, currently
Mm.
is weaponized, right? I keep being driven by his words because I'm like, well, let's reclaim that weapon.
Yeah.
And the way we do that is through those imperfectly perfect conversations like we're having, through you know people talking and understanding more and unlearning and all of those things. So I'm just wondering, is there a question I haven't asked you and you're like, oh, I so wish Fabian had asked me this because I think it's really important?
Um, I don't think so. I just talk to what wherever it goes. We just I don't feel like there's something missing.
No. Great. Okay. So maybe if you're happy, I'll invite you again and we can have more imperfectly perfect conversations. I would love
Sure.
that. And in the meantime, I wonder whether there's something in particular you feel inspired to leave us with, or you would like to you're taking away with you from our conversation.
Yeah, I think I'm taking away a lot to think about. Um, and every time one has these conversations, I'm always kind of curious about how I've structured what I say and what, I kind of do a little, later I'll do a little analysis on what I think was going on there through a kind of, racialized dynamics and anti-racist
Mm.
lens, critical anti-racist discourse analysis lens to just um, there's one thing that I brought along actually to this conversation, which I really would like to share with you in particular. You probably know it already, but also anyone who's listening. And it's an amazing book that I just read, that's called Solidarity with Children.
Mm.
And it's the subtitle of it is An Essay Against Adult Supremacy, and it's by a woman called Madeleine Lane McKinley. And the reason why I really loved this book was that we can get hung up in our kind of lanes, but sometimes, I talked about white supremacy culture. So this whole notion of adult supremacy, and these kind of supremacist ways of doing things. And then the other thing that really I was really interested in, because it's about childhood and it's about children and it's about how we conceptualize of childhood and dominate it from an adult perspective. But it's got a whole section on mothering, and mothering as a thing that everyone and anyone can and should do, and that, you know, it's not about wombs and giving birth and all of those things. It's not about adopting into your family. It's about something much greater, and it's something that's connected with the world and the environment stuff. So I kind of want to give this book as something that, yeah, I'd love people to engage with it, and maybe if anyone wanted to do a little reading group and chat
Mm,
about it,
yes, that would be lovely.
because I
Do you want
don't
to show
know
it
anyone
to
else
us
who's,
again?
yes, I don't know anyone else who's read it yet. So I'd love to be
Narrative
in
cover.
dialogue.
Right. Well, that sounds. I'm gonna go and buy it, and then I'm gonna like see who else wants to join us, and perhaps we can have a. Yeah, that would be cool.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gave me a
Yeah.
lot of space and time. Thank you. I appreciate it.
No, thank you. I'm just so grateful you said yes to me contacting you and connecting and having this first of I hope many
Mm,
perfect conversation.
thank you. Yeah, I mean, I work mainly on my own, so it's always nice to be invited to have a conversation.
Oh, amazing. Well, and perhaps before I let you go, would you like to tell others, and then we'll put it on the description for the podcast. But if people feel inspired to reach out,
Mm.
how do they get in touch with you, Penny?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. It's probably the most logical place. I've got my own website that's a bit scrappy, and it's more like a repository of stuff that I do, um, which is called 10 pence more. 10 pence more, which is on WordPress. Yeah, just reach out via either of those. And I'm always happy to support people, be supported by people, be in dialogue, um, be critiqued, whatever people feel they need to do.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.